The following is only a short excerpt of a radio interview with Marsha Sinetar. The content relates to one or more of her books, all of which and more you can read about on her website, www.marshasinetar.com.
I'm speaking with Marsha Sinetar, lecturer, author, educator, corporate psychologist. Her books include Do What You Love, The Money Will Follow, Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, Developing a 21st Century Mind, A Way Without Words. Her most recent book, this in 1993, because she says she writes a book a year, is Real Power, Spiritual Growth Through Film, available through Triumph Books. Marsha, welcome to KBOO again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Let's start out by looking at what we can learn through films. What is it about films or movies that provide the viewer with an opportunity for spiritual growth?
I think the most obvious one for me and the quick answer is that a film mirrors us. We usually do see ourselves in a film. We project ourselves. We either see ourselves at our best, most heroic. We see ourselves at our worst, most inhumane sometimes. And we can find some ways to reinvent or invent how we want to be, new scripts.
Mm-hmm.
The French director Jean Renoir said that films are about a state of mind. And so this is the position that I took in this book. I started to say to the reader, start to pay attention to the state of mind you're in when you look at films, and also watch the state of mind of the film itself, because it's important to you.
How did you get interested in doing something like this?
Well, frankly, after the 1992, 1991 book tours, I was fairly exhausted, and so I cut back on the corporate piece of my work and stayed home for quite a while. Took a semi-sabbatical, and I sort of vegged out and started watching a lot of movies, which I love. And I've always loved movies. And about 2 weeks into this torpor, I realized that I was working at the subterranean level of myself, working out certain life problems. As an artist, where do I go? As a writer, what do I say? Have I clearly expressed what I want? Is it beautiful enough? You know, these questions. And the movies that I was using were helping me solve problems. And that's when I thought, well, you know, I think I will uncover about my own life more if I talk to the reader in the way that I'm talking to myself. So in a sense, I'm urging you all as readers in the same way I was working with myself.
Mm-hmm. Marsha, it's interesting that you, when you described your own experience, that you used the term veg out.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a question I had about how someone, given that they're looking for some kind of spiritual enlightenment or spiritual questioning while they're viewing the films, is vegging out an appropriate way to be watching movies?
Well, let's see if I can answer this. First of all, on one level, I wouldn't worry too much about getting very analytical. When you're tired and you need a break, entertainment is literature, music, movies, television, a walk in the park, however you do it. It's important to have a way of non-judgmentally relaxing. Now, passive viewing may include that, okay? I'm suggesting a very active viewing method. And I think it comes in when we get our second viewing wind, if I can put it that way. So first we have to just relax and not be too ferocious about, oh, can I get every little morsel of spiritual good out of this? Because I think that really works backwards. It's counterproductive. Down the line, when you rest, and then now I notice, as a viewer, I'm watching the same kind of movie again and again. What does this mean? Or as a friend said to me about her child, she says this child brings home certain detective films. She watches them over and over again. This is where I think we can start to get some inner growth by the inquiry. Mm-hmm. What am I? What's the state of mind? Remember, I had talked about that. What is the state of mind I am in, and what is the state of mind of the movies that I like to watch, and how can I interpret that?
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example of maybe something that you write about in the book or something from your own personal experience as one of the ones where you were asking questions and then came to see that it reflected something important in your life?
I can, and it relates to this book and my career as a writer. So after this last, as I said, I was sort of tired out and kind of discouraged because the larger publishing houses didn't get the point of this book at all. And if it hadn't been for Triumph Books, I might not have gotten it published. So at one point I was watching this film called The January Man. Kevin Kline, Harvey Keitel, Rod Steiger, Susan Sarandon, great cast. It's about a guru detective. He's unconventional, to say the least. And I noticed about 10 minutes into the movie I was cheering up and I was starting to get my bearings, my artistic bearings. And I thought, now, applying my own method, what is it that's going on here? So it's this aha, something's going on, because I noticed a mood and mind shift. I interpret it that here's a man that decided to live on his own terms, whatever the costs. You know, he lives with a parrot and a cat, and his artistic friends are floating in and out of his apartment, and he has an aesthetic space that he lives in. It's not opulent, but it's great, beautiful light. And all of that meant a lot to me, and I realized that that's how I am. And so then my better wisdom said to me, you know, how we talk to ourselves, says, you know, just don't aggravate yourself. You don't have to be a big New York Times bestseller. You can be a wonderful writer, live your life, be the artist that you are, and get on with it. So it's like, stop feeling sorry for yourself, move along, and that's the way I think we grow. Mm-hmm. I think stories do that, for one thing. We know that myths, fairy tales, conversations with a friend, the inspiring life of a partner or colleague, these all help us. And I just propose to the readers that movies are no different. And especially today, where we're on the threshold of a time where we're going into all this virtual reality, mind-bending electronics, I think we have to become active consumers of the visual intake.
Right. And that reminds me, when you were talking about your experience with that movie, I was once, a very long time ago, I once responded to a survey-type query in an article in a local newspaper about people's favorite movies or people's ideas of the best movies. Mm-hmm. And I think it was the best movies, because that's the distinction I wanted to make. And when I started to make up my list, I realized that there were movies that I might consider the best movies, and then there were movies that I considered favorite movies,
right,
that weren't the same, and necessarily,
right,
even though they were, you know, there weren't any favorite ones that were really awful, but they might not be the quote unquote best movies.
Right.
And they were things that were movies that somehow spoke to
exactly
things in myself.
A woman called up on a talk show. I've been doing a lot of live talk shows around this, and she called up and she said that she has a couple of films that are so important to her, she wouldn't even tell us over the air. She's anonymous. She didn't want to say their names for fear that talking about it would trivialize the impact that she got. And I think that certain images, certainly this is true for me, certain images are sacred images to us, certain stories. I mentioned The Man for All Seasons. I think that film has had more effect on me, and the play itself, more effect on me than any other play that I've read and movie that I've seen. Very powerful. And in this way, I make the point throughout the book that it's not, this is to your point, it's not fine film that we need to pay attention to, although it's wonderful to see a fine film. But it's the ordinary movie that moves our heart, that is sacred to us. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another example of a way in which people are going to use this book. I'm sure of it. A woman called up in Ohio. She's a high school English teacher, and she hadn't seen this book, and she teaches the subject of prejudice with the movie Mask. You remember that's the movie with Cher. She has a son, and he has a certain kind of illness. I don't know what it is, a disease. And She says that high schoolers that are ordinarily very blocked as far as expressing their emotions and very sensitive to what people think of them, their appearance, this film, Mask, is the way she gets into their heart and gets them to open up about how they need to accept themselves, each other, and prejudice per se, if people are a little bit different. I think movies are, I'm shocked, frankly, that they have not been discussed more frequently by teachers, by people who want to reach people in prison, by individuals who are in recovery, for example. I see tremendous power. And the fact that parents don't watch movies with their kids and talk to them is a crime.
Can you give us a couple more sort of examples of because the questions that you suggest that people ask for various reasons are really interesting, such as the ones around things like creativity. There's you have a whole section on that, and
Right.
also virtue and other areas of life that you can. There's some really interesting questions that you specifically talk about.
I'll give you a couple of questions. I'll just read it from the book. But I want to say something about virtue, because I make the point in the book, and that's why I hope teachers, parents, people who work with what I would call adults who are at risk. Virtue is our power. And virtue is not just being patient or loving or tritely compassionate. Oh, I'll give money to the person on the street. Virtue is also the strength to endure something tough, the willingness to be truthful as a human being, who you are. Okay, and I think that's going back to the January Man. This was not a great film, like you said. This is a normal, average. It was a good movie, not a great movie, but there was something virtuous about that character that spoke to my virtue, and I then, in my better wisdom, which I wasn't able to see when tired, said, I see how I need to live. Okay, I need to just live full out without worrying too much about what people say. Okay, now here are some couple questions. You can ask yourself, how have films helped me regain lost confidence or hope? And what types of movies accomplish this? So that goes back to the points we were raising before. You can say what films or heroes or heroines or types of stories have mentored and guided me towards my best self and away from something in me that's destructive, hurtful, or unfriendly to life. These are the big questions of life. You know, when Tolstoy was writing, he wrote an essay called Confession, a Confession. He talked about how at 50 years old he was on the verge of suicide because he hadn't remembered to ask questions that as a boy he knew were the big questions of his life, namely, what has meaning? How can I be virtuous? How can I love? So I think that by the simplest of means, movies, television, look what's happened with this national obsession with Cheers. You know, we're recording this on the eve of, or the day after, the final episode. And I was very touched by the expressions from people that I've been talking to all over the country, how moved they are by an odd, motley assortment of neighborhood people that get together and enjoy each other, quirks and all. So I'm not so jaded. I think a lot of us are too cynical about the media per se.
But that particular one, for me, brings up all kind of questions about American culture and why people can watch something regularly on their television and maybe not think about, well, is there any place I can get this in my life?
This is a beautiful point that you're raising, and I've thought that too, especially in the last week. Maybe there needs to be another step, and this is why I'm suggesting in this book and my others too that the small discussion group, for example, I would love it if people would get together, maybe read a chapter, get together in their living room and talk to each other. See a movie, go with friends, go out to dinner afterwards and talk. Okay, there's this active place afterwards. For example, to your point, father called up on a live talk show, and he said he has a nephew and two sons. They regularly go to see movies together. After the movies, he usually drops his nephew off back home, and he and his sons talk in the car and at dinner or McDonald's or whatever about the film. And even when it's a violent film, his sons are able to articulate worries that they have or concerns that they have about conflict, fear, like that. His nephew doesn't have that opportunity with his father, and the nephew has all kinds of acting out problems. He's alienated, he gets into fights, he's unhappy. And the man was making the point that he was urging parents to not to forbid their kids to go see films, but rather to go with them, or at least to see the film that the kid is going to see and then talk to them after. So to your point, I think we need to take responsibility for speaking out our feelings and then not judge each other, because again, we're not talking movie criticism, we're not talking intellectualizing, which to me is a great distraction from the heart.
That's interesting. I was just thinking about that because one of the things that I do when I go to movies a lot is, well, there's various things that I do, and one is sort of critique things as they're going along.
Sure.
One is react a lot to Hollywood films that I think way overdo manipulation, real obvious manipulation of the viewer, which really angers me.
Right.
And another one is with more sort of abstract films is try to figure out what is trying to be said by the director or whoever.
Right.
And I think there's validity for all those things.
I do too.
But I think that this is a really another interesting way, and another interesting approach and valuable approach that I hadn't thought about is to talk about how these kind of things can relate to your own personal life.
I think what you're saying makes me want to add that movies that we like need to be seen several times. The Godfather series, A Man for All Seasons, a beautiful little Danish film. It's called Emma's Shadow, which I speak about. Feast. What's that one?
Babette's Feast.
Babette's Feast. There's so many excellent movies. Even Grand Canyon, which is it's a simpler film, but it's a wonderful film. These are films that you could see again and again and again and run courses on, quite frankly.
Plus, with what you're doing, what people's films the films that people could react to in this way might be totally different.
Exactly, totally different. I'll tell you an interesting thing. I did a teleconference radio interview. The host called me back. This was in the Midwest, from the Midwest. The host called me back after the show was off the air, and he said, "Thanks for this." He hadn't read the book. He said, "Thanks for this conversation. I'm going to read this book." And he said, I didn't realize why I love movies so much. But what you said about the January Man made me think of, he liked some movie, Platoon or something like that. He was a Vietnam vet. And he said that there was something in that movie that he hasn't gotten out yet. And he's going to go see it several times. So I think that we have unfinished business that movies can help us digest. And Fritz Perls, the father of Gestalt therapy, he cautioned human beings who wanted to be healthy. They have that we have to assimilate every morsel of experience before we can consider ourselves optimally healthy. So I think movies can also help us, as you said. It's not just the intellectual piece, which is perfectly valid, but it's also the heart piece, which is also valid. And we don't. And another thing, we do the Big Mac approach to everything. We go see a movie, we're ready for the next thing the minute we walk out. Then we want another movie. So it's escapist in a big way because we only want to be entertained. We don't want to do any work on our own. Whereas what I'm suggesting, what you're talking about, means going back and looking at what happened, watching how we watch.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, it occurs to me that might be why there is this phenomenon of people going back, and in fact that's considered in the marketing of films these days, I've heard. When they want to make a blockbuster, they want one that certain people, the most likely to go to movies, I guess, are young teenage boys or something, will go back and see again and again.
Right.
And I'm not sure if they're doing it for the same reasons, but maybe unconsciously they are. There's something in those films that they're trying to.
Yeah, I don't know that you can strategize that from a marketing standpoint, frankly. Maybe you can on the most obvious level, but for example, if you remember Rocky horror show, Rocky something horror show.
Yeah, Rocky Horror Picture
Yeah,
Show.
yeah, right. That is still a cult film, and there's something about that. Now, I didn't care for it, but I've seen it 2 or 3 times. I think there's something about reality that picture in the 60s or 70s, I guess it was, began to talk about, hint at, whisper about that now in our virtual reality films where we're entering a reality in almost 3D, sensory, it's so real that you feel yourself right in the situation that's being portrayed on the screen. I think that show began to hint about that. And that probably what we know there's something about consciousness that films approximate. The Rig Veda says that the mind is the swiftest of birds. Film is just like the mind. It's the swiftest of birds. It takes us, just like our dreams do, into surreal arrangements of reality.
I'm speaking with Marsha Sinetar. The book that we're talking about is Real Power, Spiritual Growth Through Film. We have a few minutes left, and there's so many questions that the book does bring up for someone, I think. I wanted to talk a little bit about how to figure out when a movie is reflective of your life. I think sometimes people don't know how to choose one that is in that manner. I'm not sure what I'm saying here, but
In other words, how do I recognize
Yeah.
that? Well, one thing I would say is you can't consciously choose in advance. You can go to see from the trailers or whatever they're called. You can go to see everything, anything that interests you, and think of it from the standpoint of your enjoyment. And then deeper, take another look and say, is this something that improved my state of mind? Going back to what I said earlier. Did I feel more optimistic? Did my life-affirming drives get restored, renewed? Did I feel hopeful, more compassionate? So these are the virtues that we talked about. And then maybe see it again. And then back to what we were talking about, maybe get a group of friends or one friend who likes the movie. And hopefully you'll take a look at my book and take some of the questions and work it as if you were working a problem, a puzzle, not critiquing anybody's comment, but rather drawing out everybody's comment. And a final word about this excess of violence and superfluous, almost pornography that we have on films to sell, I think, to be manipulated. Sometimes I think we have to think of film like food. These are mental images, and to be visually discriminating, I think we have to say, a little bit of violence, no problem. But if that's all I'm taking in, it's like just only eating grease and sugar or alcohol. Is this my only source of stimulation? I'm starting to have the feeling that we are so risk averse in this country and working so hard that we take our stimulation not from life, because we're grinding away at zillions of jobs and trying to pay bills and taxes, but we're taking our stimulation from artificial sources, chemical and visual. So this is another reason to be particularly discerning about what we're taking in through the eyes and ears.
Yeah, it occurs to me that you can also have sort of a mixed reaction to a film. I mean, I think you had a very interesting analysis in the book of Thelma and Louise.
Yeah.
And my personal reaction to that film, there were, many parts of it that I could relate to in a very positive sense and take some of the questions that you were talking about. Probably if I applied them to that film, I would, really reflect on things in my own life, and yet other aspects of it that I would probably look on with disdain. And I just wondered how that relates to what you're saying when you have a film that you can't relate to totally positively, or you can't just sort of sum it up and say yes.
That's like life. You can't wrap it up in a nice, neat, tidy little package. There is always that unanswered question. We aren't sure about this or that person, or our decision to work here or there, or are we really a good person? You know, there's a mystery in life. So I think we have to be careful not to do what TV tries to do to us too often, to sew everything up in a nice, neat little package at the end of an hour or half an hour. So the reason I presented my questions that way for Thelma and Louise is because I too felt, yes, I could certainly relate to this woman whose husband was absolute, just a horrible guy, and anger came up for me. But supposing fear had come up, that would make me come from a very different perspective about male-female or dominant submissive relationships. So I think we have to watch our emotions, which is another reason I use an almost Zen-like approach to watching our breathing while we watch a movie. This technique of watching the breath, following the breath, is not original with me, but I don't think we apply it. We think that when we sit down for 20 minutes in the morning to meditate, we've done our job, meditating, so to speak. But no, this is the point, is to culture our awareness for life. And that's another reason why we can read this material on many levels.
So when you sit down to watch a movie, you kind of get yourself in the right space before you watch it.
I actually don't. When I watch a movie, I watch, number one, for enjoyment and entertainment. I don't do any preparatory intellectualizing or anything like that. I just go in here and now, right in there with the experience. Then I notice what I notice. So that's part of my experience too, just like right now. I'm talking to you. I notice what you're saying. I'm right here in the moment with you. That's how I watch a movie. After the fact, I do run a kind of a self-assessment, like I was mentioning to you. And if it's a movie that has cheered me up considerably, or made me, sort of touched my heart, made me cry even, not just positive emotion, angered me, made me disheartened, I do take another look. What was said? How did this relate to an archetype I might have? Some energy that is straining to reach my conscious awareness. I use movie like I would use a fine art, a painting, a sculpting, a piece of music, like that.
Well, there's definitely a lot to be said there, a lot for us to think about. I want to thank you for stopping by while you're in Portland.
Oh, thank you.
You've been listening to an excerpt of a radio interview with Marsha Sinetar. For more information about this and other audio materials and her body of work, please visit www.marshasinetar.com.